in the greatest temples of ancient Babylon, beneath golden ziggurats and before statues of goddesses, a system operated for 3,000 years, a system where women's bodies became currency, where religion masked exploitation, where the word sacred justified the unspeakable. This is not mythology. This is documented history. This video will disturb you. It should. But here's what I need from you. If you want to see more deep investigations into history's darkest and most hidden practices, the stories that powerful institutions don't want told, subscribe to this channel right now. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Because this story spans continents and 3,000 years, your engagement keeps this content alive. Subscribe, comment. Now, let's talk about Babylon. Babylon, circa 600 BC, the Ishtar Gate rose 8 stories high, its glazed blue bricks shining under the Mesopotamian sun. Lions molded in yellow and white tiles lined the processional way. Bulls and dragons decorated every surface. This was not just a gate. This was a statement of power. Beyond it stood the greatest city in the ancient world, a city of over 200,000 people, a city where the Euphrates River flowed through the center, where the hanging gardens terraced toward the sky, where the ziggurat, Etemenanke, the Tower of Babel, itself dominated the horizon at nearly 300 feet tall. But Babylon's true power was not in its walls or its gardens. It was in its temples, and the most magnificent temple belonged to Ishtar. The Babylonians called her Ishtar. The Sumerians before them called her Inanna. She was the goddess of love, the goddess of war, the goddess of sex and fertility, the goddess of the morning and evening star. No deity in the Mesopotamian pantheon held more power or commanded more fear. Kings prayed to her before battle. Farmers sacrificed to her for fertile fields. Women sought her blessing for childbirth. Men desired her favor for victory and pleasure. But Ishtar was not a gentle goddess. Her mythology was violent and sexual in equal measure. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, written on clay tablets around 2100 BC, Ishtar appears as a goddess who propositions the hero Gilgamesh himself. When he rejects her, listing the fates of her previous lovers, men turned into animals, men destroyed by her anger, she rages. She demands the bull of heaven be released to punish him. The bull kills hundreds before Gilgamesh destroys it. Ishtar's response: she curses him from the walls of Uruk.in. Another myth. Ishtar descends to the underworld to challenge her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. At each of the 7 gates, she is forced to remove a piece of clothing, a piece of power, until she stands naked and powerless before the throne of death. She is killed, hung on a hook like meat. Only divine intervention brings her back. But someone must take her place. She chooses her own husband, Dumuzi, and sends him to the underworld in her stead. This was the goddess Babylon worshipped, passionate, violent, sexual, demanding, and the Babylonians believed that serving Ishtar required more than hymns or incense or animal sacrifice. Serving Ishtar required human bodies, female bodies, bodies given willingly or otherwise to honor the goddess who controlled love, desire, and fertility itself. Temples across Mesopotamian Babylon, in Uruk, in Eruk, housed women dedicated to Ishtar's service, women who were called holy, women whose duty was to embody the goddess's sexual nature, women who would spend their lives in temple chambers, serving men in Ishtar's name. But how did worship of a goddess become a system of sexual commerce? The Akkadian language had a specific word for them. It meant holy woman or consecrated one. The Sumerians called them Nistor priestesses, but these titles masked a reality recorded in temple archives, legal codes, and clay tablets spanning thousands of years. These women entered Ishtar's service through multiple paths, none of them simple. Some were dedicated by families too poor to provide dowries. In ancient Mesopotamia, marriage required a bride price and a dowry. For poor families with multiple daughters, the cost was impossible. The temple offered a solution: dedicate a daughter to Ishtar, and the family's obligation ended. The girl became the goddess's responsibility. Others were sold outright. Temple records from Uruk and Babylon list transactions, payments made by families. Girls transferred into temple custody. Some were chosen as children, selected by priests for their appearance or family status, and brought into the temple system before they understood what it meant. Once inside, their training began. The Kadista were taught music, how to play the lyre and the drum, instruments sacred to Ishtar. They learned dance, the movements used in temple rituals. They were trained in cosmetics and perfumes, how to enhance their appearance, how to attract and please, and they were taught sexual techniques. This was not metaphorical. Sumerian hymns to Inanna described the priestesses as those who make the phallus sacred and who know the art of the bed. The training was explicit and practical. Their appearance was distinctive and regulated. Many shaved their heads completely, a sign of their dedication. Others wore elaborate wigs made from human hair. They dressed in brightly colored robes, fun red or purple, colors associated with Ishtar. They wore heavy eye makeup, kohl lines extending to their temples. They adorned themselves with jewelry, gold earrings, necklaces, bracelets. When they walked through Babylon's streets, everyone knew what they were. Their legal status was equally specific. The Code of Hammurabi, written around 1750 BC, mentions the Kadestu multiple times. They could own property. They could inherit wealth. They could engage in business transactions. Temple records show some became wealthy through accumulated gifts, but they could never marry. They could not have legitimate children recognized by law. They lived separate from normal society, bound to the temple for life. Their daily reality was documented in temple administrative texts. They lived in chambers within the temple complex. They waited. Men came Babylonians, foreign merchants, soldiers, travelers. The men paid silver shekels, gold rings, grain animals. The payment went to the temple treasury. Then the transaction occurred, in Ishtar's name. As sacred service, the temple records tracked it all like any other business. Payments received, services rendered, income recorded. One Sumerian hymn describes the temple of Inanna in Uruk as a place where courtesans make the phallus rise and where the young women refresh the heart. Another text lists the Kaddish by name alongside their earnings for the temple. The language was bureaucratic, transactional, precise. Were they priestesses or prostitutes? The answer depends on who profited. Around 450 BC, a Greek historian named Herodotus traveled to Babylon. He walked through the Ishtar Gate, witnessed the city's grandeur, and observed its religious customs. What he saw disturbed him enough to record it in Book 1. Chapter 199 of his history is a text that has sparked debate among scholars for over 2,000 years. Herodotus wrote, "The most shameful custom among the Babylonians is the following. Every woman born in the country must once in her life go to the temple of Aphrodite, the Greek name for Ishtar, and there submit herself to a stranger." He described the scene in detail. Women sat in the sacred precinct of the temple, wearing crowns made of rope or cord around their heads. Passageways marked by ropes divided the space into sections. Strangers, men from Babylon and beyond, walked among them, making their choice. When a man selected a woman, he threw a silver coin into her lap. The amount did not matter. It could be a large coin or a small one. She could not refuse. As he threw the coin, the man spoke a ritual phrase. "I invoke the goddess, Melita," another name for Ishtar. The coin, once thrown, became sacred. The woman was required by religious law to follow the man outside the temple precinct and lie with him. Only after this act was complete could she return home. Only then was her obligation to the goddess fulfilled. Herodotus noted the inequality of the system. Tall and beautiful women completed the ritual quickly, sometimes within hours, but others waited. The less attractive, the older, the physically imperfect, some sat in the temple for months. Herodotus claimed some waited 3 or 4 years before a man finally chose them. Modern scholars debate Herodotus' account intensely. Some argue he exaggerated, that he misunderstood what he witnessed, that his Greek perspective colored his interpretation of Babylonian customs. Others suggest the ritual was limited to certain classes or specific circumstances, not universal for all women. The evidence is complex, but supporting documentation exists. The Code of Hammurabi references temple prostitutes with legal protections. Sumerian hymns describe sexual rituals in Ishtar's temples. Administrative records from Uruk and Babylon list payments to women performing temple services. Archaeological excavations have identified temple complexes with private chambers adjacent to main worship areas. The Kadistu existed. Temple prostitution functioned as an institution. Whether every Babylonian woman participated once, or whether thousands of women served permanently, the system was real. It was documented. It operated for millennia, and it centered on one fundamental transaction: female bodies exchanged for payment, sanctified by religious authority, in service to a goddess who demanded more than prayer. The temples of Mesopotamia were not just religious centers, they were economic empires. The Temple of Marduk in Babylon controlled estates spanning thousands of acres. Temple complexes owned farmland, orchards, workshops, breweries, and textile production facilities. They employed thousands of farmers, craftsmen, laborers, scribes, administrators. Temple archives from Uruk record property holdings, livestock counts, grain stores, and financial transactions spanning centuries. In sacred prostitution was profitable. The payment system was documented in temple records. Men paid in silver shekels, the standard currency. They paid in gold rings and jewelry. They brought grain, dates, livestock, oil, wine. Every transaction was recorded. Every payment went directly to the temple treasury. The Curiosities received housing and food, but the revenue they generated belonged to the institution. The temple hierarchy controlled everything. High priests managed the finances, allocated resources, and decided how temple wealth was spent. They selected which girls entered service, determined their training, and supervised their activities. The priests accumulated enormous power. Religious authority combined with economic control. They answered to kings, but often the temples rivaled royal treasuries in wealth. This system was not unique to Babylon. In Phoenician cities like Byblus and Sidon, temples dedicated to Astarte, the Phoenician version of Ishtar, employed sacred prostitutes. In Corinth, Greece, the temple of Aphrodite maintained over 1,000 women, according to the geographer Strabo, writing in the 1st century BC. In Cyprus, at the sanctuary of Aphrodite in Paphos, ritual prostitution was documented by multiple ancient sources. In Syria, at temples in Hierapolis, similar practices existed. Wherever goddess worship spread across the ancient Near East and Mediterranean, this system followed. The practice served multiple functions simultaneously. Religiously, it honored Ishtar and ensured her favor. Economically, it enriched the temples and funded their operations. Socially, it provided an outlet for male sexuality outside marriage, reducing social tensions. Politically, it gave priests control over women's bodies, and the revenue they generated power that extended beyond the temple walls. The temples grew more magnificent with each generation. The Ishtar Gate was rebuilt and enlarged. Ziggurats were renovated with imported cedar and precious metals. Temple complexes expanded. Priest quarters became luxurious. Meanwhile, the Curiosities aged. Temple records stopped mentioning them after a certain point. They simply disappear from the documentation. No pensions, no retirement, no record of what happened when they were no longer useful. This wasn't worship. This was a business model sanctified by divine authority. At the highest level of this system stood the Intu priestesses. These were not common women. They were daughters of kings, sisters of rulers, women from the most elite families in Mesopotamia. Their selection was political. Their role was ceremonial. But their duty was the same. Every year during the New Year festival, Akitu, in Akkadian, the most important ritual in the Babylonian calendar, took place. It was called Hyros Gamos, sacred marriage. The Entu priestess, representing the goddess Ishtar, would have sexual intercourse with either the king or the high priest, representing the god Dumuzi or Marduk, depending on the city and era. The belief was explicit. This ritual ensured fertility for the land. It guaranteed abundant harvests. It brought prosperity to the kingdom. The sexual union of divine representatives transferred divine blessing to the physical world. Without this ritual, the Babylonians believed, crops would fail, livestock would sicken, women would become barren. The ceremony was documented in temple texts and cylinder seals showing ritual bedchambers. It was performed in the temple's most sacred space, witnessed by high-ranking priests and officials. It was state religion at the highest level, but strip away the religious language, and the reality becomes clear. This was institutionalized ritual rape dressed as religious ceremony. The Entu priestess had no choice in the matter. She was selected, often as a child, and raised for this purpose. Her consent was irrelevant. Her role was to embody the goddess and submit to whoever represented the god that year. The system operated on two levels. Elite women like the Entu performed once annually in elaborate ceremony, their participation framed as the highest honor. Lower-ranking Curiosities serviced common men daily, year after year, their lives reduced to routine transactions. Temple administrative texts from Uruk list these women by name alongside their payments. Anomansim received 3 shekels, silver. Ninsan daughter received 2 shekels silver. The records are clinical, bureaucratic, endless. From queens to commoners, from ritual to routine, the system consumed women's bodies for 3,000 years. Modern scholars have debated the nature of sacred prostitution for decades, and their interpretations reveal as much about contemporary values as about ancient reality. In the 1970s and 1980s, some feminist historians argued that sacred prostitution represented female empowerment. They pointed to evidence that Cadesta could own property, conduct business transactions, and accumulate wealth. These women were not controlled by husbands or fathers. They operated independently within a patriarchal society. They wielded the power of Ishtar herself. According to this interpretation, sacred prostitution gave women economic autonomy and sexual agency unavailable to ordinary wives and daughters. The evidence supporting this view exists. Temple records show some Cadestu owned houses and farmland. Legal documents record them making loans and engaging in commerce. In a world where most women were legal property transferred from father to husband, this was significant independence. Then, in the 1990s and 2000s, scholars like Stephanie Boudin challenged the entire concept. They argued that sacred prostitution, as described by Herodotus, never existed. According to this theory, Greek and Roman writers misunderstood Mesopotamian religious practices. Herodotus was biased against Eastern cultures. He saw temple priestesses performing fertility rituals and assumed they were prostitutes. The Cadisto, they claimed, were respectable religious officials, not sex workers. The whole narrative was Greek prejudice and misinterpretation. But the Babylonian sources tell a different story. Girls were dedicated to temples as children. Often, before age 10, they had no choice in their dedication. Temple payment records from Uruk and Babylon list transactions by name. Silver received, services rendered. The revenue went to temple treasuries, not to the women themselves. The Code of Hammurabi legally prohibited them from marriage and legitimate children, and when these women aged beyond usefulness, they simply disappeared from the records. No retirement, no pensions, no mention of their later lives. The hymns are explicit. Sumerian texts describe them as making the phallus sacred and knowing the art of the bed. Administrative documents track sexual transactions like any other temple business. This was not metaphor or mistranslation. This was documented commerce. Call it sacred service if you want. Call them priestesses or holy women or devotees of Ishtar. But women's bodies exchanged for payment that enriched institutions is exploitation, regardless of the religious language used to justify it. The system lasted approximately 3,000 years. It began during the Sumerian period around 3000 BC, continued through the Akkadian Empire, flourished under the Babylonian dynasties, persisted through Assyrian rule, and survived into the Neo-Babylonian period, when Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BC and the Persian Empire absorbed Mesopotamia. The practice continued. Persian kings maintained Babylonian temples and their traditions. Sacred prostitution endured under foreign rule. Only when Christianity spread through the region between 300 and 400 AD did the practice finally end. Christian doctrine condemned temple prostitution as pagan corruption. Churches replaced temples. New laws banned the old rituals. After 3 millennia, the system collapsed, not because it was recognized as exploitative, but because a new religion replaced the old one. Why did it last so long? Because it benefited everyone who held power. Priests controlled the revenue and maintained religious authority. Temples accumulated enormous wealth. Men had sanctioned access to women's bodies. Merchants profited from the transactions. Kings used the rituals to legitimize their rule. The system served the interests of those who could sustain or challenge it. The women it consumed had no power to resist. This pattern repeats throughout history. Gilles de Rais, the 15th century, French nobleman, believed he was summoning demons when he tortured and murdered over 140 children. His religious conviction justified unspeakable acts. The Catholic Inquisition believed burning heretics at the stake saved souls from eternal damnation. Torture became a tool of salvation. The Babylonians believed sacred prostitution honored Ishtar and ensured prosperity. Exploitation became worship. Religion provides powerful justification for practices that, viewed from outside, are clearly abusive. When divine authority sanctions an action, moral questioning becomes heresy. When gods demand it, humans comply. and those who benefit from the system have every reason to maintain the religious framework that legitimizes their power. We have the temple accounts. We have the laws. We have hymns praising the Cadesto and payment records listing their transactions. We have administrative texts documenting the system's operations across millennia. We have Herodotus' observations and the Code of Hammurabi's regulations. We have archaeological evidence of temple, chambers, and ritual spaces. But we don't have their voices. We don't know what these women thought as they were dedicated to Ishtar as children. We don't know what they felt waiting in temple chambers. We don't know if they believed in the goddess's blessing or recognized their exploitation. We don't know if they found meaning in their service or resented every moment. We don't know their fears, their hopes, their private griefs, their small rebellions. The powerless leave few records. The enslaved write no chronicles. History preserves the perspectives of those with power to record them: kings, priests, administrators, foreign observers. The women themselves remain silent. Thousands lived and died within this system. Most are completely anonymous. Even those named in temple records Ninomansum appear only as entries in account books. Their names survive, but their humanity does not. We can only reconstruct their lives from what others wrote about them, from the structures that controlled them, from the institutions that profited from them, from the laws that regulated them, from the hymns that praised their service to the goddess, while ignoring their lived reality. A 3,000-year system of sexual exploitation, sanctified by religion, enriching temples, controlled by priests, documented in clay tablets, regulated by law, practiced across civilizations, and experienced by women whose voices are lost to history forever.